All right, so for Unit 1, these are our foundational civilizations. Right? Unit 1, we're just figuring out as a species how to create, societies. Right? We're figuring out how to build cities. Right? We're seeing our very first of these sorts of things. But by Unit 2, one of the big changes that we're going to see is in state building. Yeah, we're getting into Unit 2 again.
So this Unit 2 or we still in 1?
Yeah, Unit 2, guys. Come on, guys. You guys are killing me. All right. So, one of the big things that we see is a difference in how state building proceeds, right? In the early unit, right? In Unit 1, we see mostly decentralized civilizations with a couple very small empires. In Unit 2, this is where empire building becomes a thing, right? We're going to see a series of empires that will be the biggest the world has ever seen. Right? We're going to see massive empires that will shape an entire region's culture. And the first of these for us is going to be ancient Persia, right? Or under the Achaemenid kings. Right? So the Achaemenid Persians. Right? So these guys are developing in what is today Iran, which is in the Middle East. Right? If we were going to describe the climate of the Middle East, how might we do that?
Hot.
It's hot and arid, right? Or dry, right? Hot, there's not enough to drink. Right? And so what the ancient Persians have to do is they have to develop a system to overcome this, especially if you want to grow a huge empire, you're going to need to be able to produce food to feed those people. And so what they do is they develop the Qanat system. Right? This is that irrigation system where we get those series of underground canals with interlinking well systems to them. Right? By keeping your water underground, you keep it from evaporating. And so you can move it to your from the underground aquifers to the source. Right? This becomes really important because we're going to start to see products like rice make it into the Middle East, which are going to require a good deal of water, right, to grow. Right, we're going to see other products from other parts of Asia start to migrate to the Middle East, where they'll need that ready access to water. Right. And this is our first real big example of empire building, right? Of true empire building. The Persians will conquer not only all the countries in their area, but they'll spread to conquer countries in different regions. Right? Their empire at its height under Darius will stretch from the eastern Mediterranean. What? Which will stretch from the eastern Mediterranean all the way to South Asia. It becomes so big, in fact, that Darius is going to have to divide the country up into 20 sub-regions, right, provinces, and he's going to put in charge of each of those provinces a hereditary governor called a satrap. The idea here being that the kingdom is, or the empire is so big that it's unmanageable from the capital, right? Instead, you're going to have to delegate some of that responsibility. Those satraps will become the dominant political figure within their region. They'll be in charge of raising taxes. They'll be in charge of raising armies and defending territory. Right? We're going to see a key characteristic of this time, right? If you're building big empires, then you have to be able to get your men and materials from one end of the country to the other. Right? And so our Persians become the first big empire to begin building major road networks. Right? And the biggest of the Persian roads becomes known as the Royal Road, and this will bisect the Persian Empire from east to west. Right? The Persians will look to expand, right, under Darius' grandson, a guy named Xerxes. He was not a 10-foot tall Brazilian with a bunch of piercings.
I got it.
300.
Yeah.
Come on, William. Catch up.
I watched that. He was also not a
Yeah, he was not.
Big place.
He was not like a actually
no. Actually said that he was-
Right, but anyway, Xerxes will attempt to invade the Greek peninsula. Right? Unfortunately for Xerxes, he's got a Middle Eastern army that he takes out of the Middle East. Right? So while we'll get the last stand of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, right, in this war, what this really amounts to is that you've got guys that are lightly armored because they live in places where if you're heavily armored, you'll die from heat exhaustion. They go into an area against guys that can wear very heavy armor because it's a moderate climate. Right? And so they get this big fight between the between the Persian army, which vastly outnumbers the Greeks, but the Greeks have the technological and environmental advantage, and they're going to win, right? Which is why it becomes known as the Persian Wars, right? It's because the Greeks were fighting the Persians. Right? And this will temporarily prevent Greece from falling under the clutches of the Persians. Right? Speaking of the Greeks, right? The Greeks are divided up into city-states called polis. Right? Polis is the center of Greek political and cultural life. And in Greece, these are decentralized, right? They have a common culture, but it's expressed differently in each city-state, right? And so we looked at the examples of Sparta and Athens as two wildly different interpretations of the same religion, or excuse me, of the same culture, right? But it's within these areas that we're going to start to see some of these cultural phenomenon of the Greeks that are going to stand out, right? So we get things like the Acropolis, right? The high city. It's this defensive position that each Greek city had so that people could fall back to it, right? Like if you go to Athens, the Acropolis isn't the Parthenon at the top, it's actually the plateau you're standing on, right? You get the Agora, which is this marketplace, which in Athens would become really, really important because not only was it where you did all your business, it's also where politicians would come to make speeches and where votes would be taken. It became a general meeting ground for the important people of Athens. We're also going to see the development of Greek architectural style, right? The white marble columns, the decorated friezes, right? We're also going to see, because of the relative affluence of Athens, we're going to see the creation of some, or the, not the creation, but the genesis of some, that's weird, I said not creation, but I used a different word that means creation. But we're going to see the development of a couple really important philosophers. Right, we have 3 Greek philosophers that we need to know. Right, we got Socrates, right, who is the founder of Greek philosophy. Right, he's the guy that's going to run around asking people why they think this and why they think that, and generally annoy people so much that the the Athens city fathers will come together and convict him of corrupting the youth, which has a wildly different connotation in Greece than it does in our country. And they will force him to either apologize, go into exile, or kill himself, and he chooses to kill himself. Right?
Like all Greek philosophers.
Well, the exile was basically a slower death because you're only a citizen in the country or in the city-state that you were from. But he chooses that. His student, his most famous student, Plato, will come next. Right? And he's going to write some works that are become kind of instrumental to modern Western thinking. Right? Like the Republic is kind of the basis for the Matrix and other stuff. It also influenced the Bible. Yeah. Plato. But he's most famous for us for forming his academy, right? The very first university-style school, right? Where you would come and learn from experts in different fields, right? His most famous student would be a guy named Aristotle, right? He'll form the Lyceum in Alexandria, which is another version of the academy, right? And he's also famous for teaching Alexander the Great, right? The Macedonian king. Right. Yeah, so we get these different kind of cultures, right? So in Athens, we've got a direct democracy, right? Versus Sparta, where we have a much more communist-style military dictatorship, right? But remember, when we're looking at these, then we see vastly different communities, right? On its face, Sparta seems a much more harsh place, right? To join the army, men have to murder a slave without getting caught, right? That's your graduate. That's your EOC for the army there. Right? That's how you demonstrate mastery, is you have to sneak out at night and murder somebody without getting caught, right? I know. You enter the army too when you're 7, so let that kind of set in. Right?
That's still harder than our EOCs.
Yes, way harder than our EOCs.
Our EOCs are just.
Oh, you feel like you're balanced out?
Ours are just curved.
You hear muffled scream.
No, that you graduate when you're 18.
Which one's
They just share
OTC?
No, they have to just don't get to graduate.
He's just practicing.
They have to try again. Because you got to bring a token.
Like an ear
Yeah.
or something.
But so while that seems like a much more harsh climate, right, or a much more harsh culture, what we also get is that it's actually much more equal in terms of gender relations, right? Because every man was in the army, then then Spartan cities were run by Spartan women. Right, they were dominating the economic life. They were dominating the household, things like this. Right, men when they could marry didn't live in the house until they were old. Right, like Mr. Smith old. Right. In Athens, remember the 2 greatest days of a woman's life are when
When she.
married and when she dies.
Mary's that's before you said it,
So even though we like to think of Athens as like this very forward-thinking, bastion of wisdom or font of wisdom, right? Remember that it's complicated, right? Sometimes in Athens you can have some really good ideas and have some really bad ideas, right? All at the same time, right? Also, when we talk about democracy in Athens, who were the people that got to vote?
So only the rich and powerful
Well, rich Athenian men. Yeah, it's not even just any white guy. If you were from Sparta, you're not voting there. You had to be born and raised in Athens as a man. And have money. Yeah.
I love
All
it.
right.
Oh,
So,
yeah, this one.
our 2 greatest civilizations of Unit 2 are Rome and the Han. Right? There's a lot of similarities between these 2, not only in how they arrive, but also in how they collapse. Right? These 2 will also form the foundations of the Silk Roads. Right? This is when that trade route will begin, and it will be because of these 2 anchors on either side. Right? So when we talk about Rome, it begins as a republic. So it's not being ruled by a king or an emperor or a principate. Right? It's being ruled by elected officials. You've got 2 consuls, which are the executive. You've got the Senate, which is the legislative branch. Later on, the poor people of the Roman Republic will demand their own representation and will get the tribunals, right, which will get added in there. And their job was to counterbalance the Senate, but did that actually happen?
No.
No, because it turns out being super rich means you can buy influence, right? But we get that sort of government, and then you get everybody else at the bottom, right? Under the Republic, you would, in times of emergencies, hire, appoint a dictator, things like that. We'll see that during the Punic Wars with Carthage. But it's during the Republic that Rome does the majority of its expansion. Right? It will emerge as this regional power within Western Italy. It'll then conquer all of Italy. It'll then start to spread around the Mediterranean world. So they'll conquer all of Southern Europe, all of Northern Africa, all of the Eastern Mediterranean, right, the Western Middle East. Right, they'll ring the Mediterranean, and then they'll start to expand into other parts of Europe. Eventually, there will be a civil war between three generals. A guy named Pompey, a guy named Crassus, and a guy named Caesar. Caesar will emerge victorious, right? And he's a very popular general who became super popular by trying to ethnically cleanse the Celts out of France. Right? This is one of our earlier cases of genocide. Yeah, it's weird.